Hello everyone, welcome to week 3. I apologize for the slow upload of the screencasts this week. I hope it didn't affect the flow of the class too much since this was not the first thing that you needed to do. The first time I recorded them, they somehow didn't have sound. Everything told me it had sound, and then when I went back to replay them, they did not have sound. I have now figured out the issue, and so here we are with sound. What we're going to do is just have, I should really only take about 2 screencasts for myself to talk to you this week because you've already got the TED Talk that hopefully you watched before you watched this on is there a real you, to sort of bring in some of these concepts of self. We're going to have maybe just a couple of screencasts here, and then at the end of our stuff for this week, for that last discussion board, there's a 1-hour YouTube video I want you to watch. It's a documentary, and it's got to do with outside forces that have a stake in how we communicate with ourselves. So I will reference that as we go through this, these 2 screencasts or so. It might be 3, we'll see, on the self and intrapersonal communication. So I just want to dive in. Here we go. So last week, we spent some time locating intrapersonal communication. Actually, we spent a lot of time. I think it was 5 screencasts, totaling about 75 minutes. So that was a lot of me, which I'm not sure I'm not sure I like, but we'll see if that was effective or not. So far, it seemed really good because of the discussions. I'm looking forward to getting through the journals from the first 2 weeks. So what we did is we located intrapersonal communication at the level of meaning making within ourselves. And so this question of what actually counts as intrapersonal communication, really what we're saying from last week is hey, you know what, if we're making meaning inside of ourselves, it's intrapersonal communication. And so then we also identified self-talk as one of our main focus of the semester, and then you did a journal on it. You actually did a discussion board and a journal on it. So and so far, that's going really, really well. We started this week with the TED Talk, examining the concept of a real or a true self. And one of the things that's cool about that talk is he talks about the fluid nature of our sense of self and really what that means and what that looks like. And so after watching that, though, what I want to do is I want to set forward some more specific terminology or concepts, because he's sort of referencing the self in ways that are about the self, but then also about other things, also about our personality, also about our identity. And the truth is, those are not exactly the same thing, okay? So what I want to do is explore the differences between the personality, the self, and our identity. And we're going to highlight the role of intrapersonal communication throughout this as we go, okay? So let's head in. We're going to talk about personality, self, and identity. And so, okay, why? Why, Brandon, okay? Because, and this is important, the ways we communicate with ourselves, our self-talk, the ways that we, basically the ways that we treat ourselves communicatively within our own sort of inner communicative reality has a lot to do with how we understand ourselves within the different contexts we navigate on a day-to-day basis. So the way that you communicate with yourself is going to be a big piece of how you form your self-concept. Not the only thing. It's not everything, okay? Intrapersonal communication is not everything. We can't say that, but it's going to be linked to the process in really intimate, interesting ways. Okay, so let me dive in a little bit here. Those of you who've had me in intercultural this semester, and I know there are 1 or 2 of you. This is now something I talk a little bit about in intercultural, and it came out of me doing research for this class and me realizing that this needs to be in multiple places. So let's talk about the personality, okay? So if this were class, I would ask you to try to talk to me about what your personality is. So much of the time we have a hard time distinguishing the difference between our personality, this concept of self, and our identity. Like what is this? So here we go. I visited the American Psychological APA. It's a good source for all things in the realm of psychology. Folks, it's not just a citation thing, so you should maybe check it out if you're interested, okay? So I went to apa.org and found this really good explanation of personality. So personality refers to individual differences in characteristic patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Personality is going to be different than self. That's not to say that it's completely compartmentalized from it. Like I don't have self over here, and then I don't have personality over here. They're like this. I do this all the time, but they are they're connected, but they're not the same thing. Okay, so if you look at this, characteristic patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving, and so then if you come here, consistent patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting. So if you look at these, two ways of approaching this, this is also APA right here. Okay, patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting, consistent. So they're characteristic and they're consistent. So the ways that we think, the ways that we feel, and the ways that we act are going to be linked to personality. And then, okay, Brandon, but couldn't that still be the self? Couldn't that be identity? Yeah, here's the difference, okay? Your personality is something that's more stable, which is not easily changed. You can sort of work on your personality a little bit, but it's not going to be changed easily. And one of the best examples is your level of introversion or extroversion. Your level of introversion or extroversion is something you don't exactly have a whole lot of control over. I mean, you can exert control. It takes some work. You know, if you're naturally an introverted person, you can push yourself to be more extroverted when the time is needed. But for most of us, what's going to happen is if we are an introvert and we have to be pushed into being an extrovert, we're going to revert back. We're going to revert back to where we're at. Okay, so that is really a good example of personality. Your personality is something that you could say on the side of what parts of us are nature and what parts of us are nurture. I don't know if you've been a part of that debate or talk or anything. It's really good to have. The personality is more nature. You are a mixture of nature and nurture, and you're not all nature, but you're not all nurture either. To say that everything in us is socialized is not correct. So the personality is the nature part of you. It's sort of your natural temperament, your sense of humor sometimes can be personality, stuff like that. Okay, so do you tend to be more sort of chipper and upbeat? Do you tend to be more sort of not that? So that's personality. Personality is the things you have less control over. So next then is self. And so here we are. Oh, and you know what, before I move on, next is self, but we're talking about intrapersonal communication in this class. And so if you look at our patterns of thinking, our patterns of feeling, excuse me, and our patterns of behaving, our patterns of acting, the ways that we communicate with ourselves has a lot to do with us and how we understand our personality. It has to do with how we begin to make sense of our personality in our inner reality, okay? And so now we get to the elements of self. And so instead of just talking about the self or defining the self right off the bat, we're going to talk about the elements of it. I mean, I'm going to give you a sort of definition here. But so communication as a discipline defines communication in this way, okay? And I'm going to show you another one on the next slide, but I want to hit this. It's a multidimensional process that involves forming and acting from social perspectives that arise and evolve in communication with others and ourselves. So it's a multidimensional process, which means there are many layers to what's going on with ourself. It is a process. When you watched the TED Talk, the metaphor that was used was that of a waterfall, and that's a pretty good metaphor for our sense of self. It's not an illusion. It's real. If I jump in that water, I'm going to go over the edge of that waterfall. That is not an illusion, but it's definitely fluid. It's definitely always changing, and the water that is consistently flowing over that waterfall is different every single second. And so your self is a multidimensional process. Ultimately, a better way to talk about the self, and this is where we get sort of caught up in semantics, I would say, is this idea of uh, I think we should call it sense of self rather than myself, because really you have your personality, but yourself is just this constant, ongoing, ever-changing process, and so a sense of self is really a good thing to say. Now, here's the thing: this is not to say that there are not parts of us that we feel are true to who we actually are. Okay, especially there are a lot of there's a lot of teaching on things like the true self in some of the major world faith systems, and so that's not to say that there's not something that's a part of us that can be that way. I'm going to get to what we would call that. Okay, but this multidimensional process comes from from forming and acting from social perspectives that arise and evolve in communication with others and ourselves. And we're going to talk about how that happens, okay? So your self evolves out of your interaction with yourself and with others. So the self is both a product of situations and a shaper of behavior in situations. And so it's definitely sort of a circular cycle. Which comes first, you can't really say. Yourself is going to be the product of the situations in your life, and your personality is even going to impact that, right? If I'm more introverted, I am going to experience a birthday party for a friend in a different way than someone else is, and that's that product of situations, and so that can also then be my shaper of behavior, right? So the self has to do with, it's from the stuff we're participating in, but it also has to do with how we behave. The self is the evolving composite of self-awareness, self-concept, and self-esteem. So if you had to ask what are the ingredients that make up the self, these are the three. Okay? Self-awareness, self-concept, self-esteem. These are the three things that make it up. So let's talk about these three things. So self-awareness. It sounds like a sort of I don't know. It's weird. Let's define self-awareness, but here's a good way to talk about it, okay? The ability to step outside of yourself and view yourself as a unique person, distinct from your surrounding environment, in order to reflect on your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So you being able to sort of step outside of yourself to understand, hey, you know what? I am a self-aware human being. And we're not meaning self-aware here in the way of, you probably know the person who's very self-aware, that they understand their strengths, they understand their weaknesses. That's sort of a different meaning of self-aware. What we're talking about here is you're able to reflect, the ability to reflect. You don't have to know your strengths and weaknesses like that other person. You just being able to makes you self-aware. Okay? So then next we have self-concept. Your self-concept is your overall perception of who you are. And there's that word perception again. Last week we talked quite a bit about perception and how it's different from sensation, right? And so your self-concept is at the level of perception. And so overall in your life, it's your perception of who you are. And it can be everything from I am tall, I have hair, I work at this place, all the way to, I am someone who has value, I am someone who has no value. Your self-concept can be just about physical things. It can also be about mental and emotional states, okay? Now, your self-esteem is the overall value that we assign to ourselves, okay? So, if I say I'm tall, well, okay, what sort of value do I assign to that? That's going to be my self-esteem. And so these are the three ingredients of self, okay? Self-awareness, self-concept, and self-esteem. Take a look at these, and as we go through everything that we're doing, I'm gonna hit pause right now, and then we're gonna come back in the next screencast, and I want to make sure I highlight how intrapersonal communication plays a role in all of these. I'll see you in the next screencast.